Before we begin, some of you might be wondering why this video includes 2 Zelda games. This isn't the same as the Oracle games, which were quite clearly connected. Originally, I was going to keep them separate, but after mulling over them for a while, I came to an unexpected realization. I loved them, but I also hated them. And the reason for that is simple. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are 2 halves of an unfulfilled whole. I feel as though talking about them separately would be doing them a disservice. These games are Nintendo DS titles in every sense of the word. Tech demos to show off the unique capabilities of the system, using Zelda as its communication method. You can only move using the stylus, you can draw on maps, you're forced to use the microphone at various points, and there was online multiplayer integration. There are also some of the only Zelda games, next to maybe Majora's Mask, that can call themselves direct sequels. All of these games are supposedly on a timeline, or so the fans insist, but this is one of the only cases where a Zelda game was given the opportunity to play off the original, twice over. Since these 2 games clearly occur within the same timeline of events, carry the same mechanics and overall structure, I would be repeating myself too often if I decided to tackle them separately. It's very hard to talk about one without the other, seeing as Spirit Tracks both fixed and created new problems Phantom Hourglass never had. I know a lot of you may have preferred I talk about them separately, but rest assured, I will look at both of these games as thoroughly as I would if I were looking at them alone. One game should not outshine the other, and by the end, my hope is that you'll understand more clearly where I'm coming from. With that, we begin a Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks retrospective. As continuations of The Wind Waker, both of these games do a great job continuing its momentum. Moments after the ending of the original, the gang stumble across the mysterious ghost ship, which abducts Tetra, leaving Link stranded on an unfamiliar island. There you meet a fairy named Ciela and a brave warrior of the sea named Linebeck, who both assist you in your travels to find the ghost ship, rescue Tetra, and eventually put an end to the life-eating monster known as Bellum. Can I first just say how refreshing it is that Phantom Hourglass respects the amazing ending of the original? Where cycles are broken, tradition cast aside to allow a new generation to take hold. There is not a single mention of anything pertaining to the main series. Tetra being Princess Zelda is never brought up, she's just Tetra. The story of Ciela, Linebeck, and Oshus is a unique conflict unconcerned with relics like the Triforce. It's an honest-to-God new threat that exists out in the world somewhere. A legend made real, if you will. You're carrying on the will of the Ocean King, who failed to entirely stop Bellum from invading the world. You're exploring even more of the Great Sea with new companions. It's fine-tuned to the same lighthearted frequency of The Wind Waker. It's genuinely funny, due in no small part to characters like Linebeck, aka the OG Groose. He's less of a bully figure turned good, and more a pathetic man turned heroic. Your first encounter has you save him from the Temple of the Ocean King, only for him to ditch you seconds later. He only agrees to assist you in your search for Tetra because there's rumored treasure aboard the ghost ship. Link and Ciela do all the dirty work while Linebeck ferries them around, basically. He often chastises Link for taking too long, boasting that he could have done better. Though he's also the same character who's constantly being chased by his ex-girlfriend and hides waiting for Link to handle it whenever she pops up. Jolene harasses you on the high seas every once in a while, and though it's the same encounter every time, you get more insight into their relationship, until it's revealed near the end that one of his acts of cowardice ended up saving her. From that moment, she was captivated by him, but he didn't feel worthy of her. After all, he's a coward at heart, but his stubbornness is what won her over, and it's why, despite his antics, she kept chasing him, even though he didn't even steal anything that important from her. It all culminates in this ridiculously great character moment where he saves Link from Bellum. Where before he would avoid conflict at all cost, sticking by the sidelines and running off with the treasure, he realized his own hidden potential. That's why he wishes for his ship back at the end of the game. His adventures aren't over. In fact, they're only just beginning. He's a new man, a new Captain Linebeck. Much like Groose, it's really simple, but it works just as well. Linebeck goes from hilariously afraid to respectfully courageous, and there's just something admirable about that. Through Link, he became the man he was suppressing all along. In a way, the player inspired him to get there by sailing the seas without a hint of fear. While characters like Ciela and Oceus don't really get the same treatment, I don't think they needed to. Ciela is a fun companion, not too obtrusive, and plays off Linebeck in humorous ways. She just will not put up with his shit, I love it. When it's revealed that Oceus was the Ocean King all along, for once, I didn't see it coming. The Temple of the Ocean King is an old relic. The legends of the Ocean King are similarly ancient, so the idea that the Ocean King would still be around and kicking never even crossed my mind, making the twist even more powerful. Which is funny because, in retrospect, it's foreshadowed pretty hard. He knows so much about the world and what Link has to do, and characters even ask him how he knows so much. I just assumed he was an adventurer who tried to explore the depths of the temple a long time ago, a lot like Link, evidenced by the sword he keeps behind his house. Ciela's lost memory being wrapped into this doesn't really go anywhere, but again, it was a nice mystery with a satisfying payoff. It feels like a big new adventure, new islands with unique temples, cultures, and never-before-seen races. Sure, maybe the Gorons return, but what about the Isle of Frost? It introduces the Anuki and the Yuk, two races in conflict ever since a Yuk kidnapped an Anuki 100 years ago. Uncovering the island's secrets and ridding it of Bellum's presence reveals that the Yuk were being controlled the entire time. It's a neat, self-contained story on your path to defeating Bellum. Or what about the Kabul Kingdom, the ruins of an ancient Egyptian civilization? Not only do you have to find out Kabul's location on another island using a past adventurer's notes as a set of clues, you communicate with its ghostly denizens to learn more about the kingdom and to find the mineral within its temple. This adventure feels distinct from the one in the Wind Waker thanks to all this. The first game was a journey to save your sister, which saw Link saving the Rito and Koroks before finally facing down Ganon and ending the cycle of tragedy brought on by the Kingdom of Hyrule and its denizens. Phantom Hourglass is a quest to save Tetra, which sees Link ending a feud between two warring races and putting the spirits of a long-dead civilization to rest before finally inheriting the will of the Ocean King and striking down the evil Bellum once and for all. I can't overstate how wonderful it is that these two narrative structures can be so similar, yet so different in substance. I'm not trying to say that Bellum is some great new antagonist, he's really just a big old evil thing. I don't really like Bellum, I like what he represents. He's part of a legend. His presence inspires adventure the same way Calamity Ganon does, on an admittedly smaller scale. There are a surprising amount of parallels. In Breath of the Wild, you learn about events in the past that led to Calamity Ganon destroying Hyrule, and Link's failed attempts at vanquishing him, the same way you learn about the Ocean King's failed attempts at vanquishing Bellum. Though, if I might be controversial, I think I prefer the implications of Phantom Hourglass. In Breath of the Wild, it feels less like a legend and more like a thing Link already did but forgot about. He already faced Ganon and already lost, so when he comes back for the rematch, it's somewhat impactful, but none of it is very mysterious. Whereas Oceus is a better stand-in for a previous incarnation of Link, even if he is a giant whale. Link is a foreigner to this land, which has its own pre-established backstory, so when you come in and take up the mantle previously retired by Oceus, it feels more impactful when you eventually slay that evil. After all, in both of these games, the player is never the one that fails, which defeats the purpose of going back for a rematch. The final battles aren't rematches as far as the player is concerned, they're first-time encounters, which is why it's more effective for me that someone else failed to defeat Bellum, that this long-forgotten hero was unsuccessful, where the player has a chance to correct those mistakes and craft their own legend along the way. Spirit Tracks takes place 100 years after Phantom Hourglass, and opens once again with Nico as a framing device. Link is ready to become a full-fledged engineer, but instead he finds himself with Ghost Zelda forcibly cast out of her body, ready to restore the Spirit Tracks and stop the Demon King from being resurrected. Though it does reference aspects of Hyrule, I got the feeling this was done more as an homage than anything else. For one thing, the story is still entirely unconcerned with Ganon, and secondly, the garb that the guards wear is almost certainly an homage to Link rather than an homage to Hyrule itself. Sure, Zelda looks similar to Tetra, but as evidenced by the stained glass window with Tetra on it, this was probably just out of respect to the King of Red Lions, or an acknowledgement of her legacy. Again, there's no mention of the Triforce or anything like that. The villains want to resurrect the Demon King Malladus, another faceless evil, another legend made real. There are mysteries surrounding who made the tracks and what purpose they ultimately served. The Locomos are cool analogs for the sages of old. It feels like a plausible society built off the backs of Tetra and her pirate gang. It seems this land exists in peace, the only evil residing in human insecurities and fear. Byrne has an interesting character arc based on his own fear, wishing to be as powerful as the Demon King should he ever arise. After not receiving that power, he realizes just how much of a mistake he made and assists Link and Zelda in defeating Malladus, sacrificing himself in the process. It's not as memorable or as charming as Linebeck's evolution, but I'd be lying if I said his death didn't get to me, the sly bastard. The Chancellor is just evil. It's less about a cycle of despair brought on by a long-dead wave of evil, and more an ignorant, stupid human set on ruining the land. The Demon King isn't fated to rise. In fact, they seem to have a pretty tight grip on his seal until one of their own went about trying to summon him. Maybe the antagonists aren't amusing in their own right, but Zelda more than makes up for that. This is arguably her best incarnation. She's quippy, funny, scared of bugs, and has some of the best cutscenes in any Zelda game. Having her accompany you as your companion is the best of both worlds. This is exactly what I wanted from Tetra in both The Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, but it was never adequately delivered. Phantom Hourglass even shoves her away for the entire game besides the beginning and end, which was a massive shame. Spirit Tracks Zelda isn't exactly like Tetra, she's a sheltered scaredy cat, but they play less on the negative attitudes associated with that archetype, and more on the comedic undertones of that archetype. She's not an ice queen, she's genuinely nice and wants to help people. She kinda reminds me of Ciela, but with better character moments. She's so sheltered that she genuinely believes that she can't be of any help to her kingdom, and assumes Link should be the one doing all the work. Controlling her in the Phantom and being a crucial asset throughout the game shows that she is just as capable as he is. When Link struggles to deliver the final blow to Malladus, Zelda strolls up and pushes the sword in with Link, signifying this as both Link and Zelda's adventure. When Link and Zelda hold hands at the end of the game, it was one of the only times I bought a connection between the two. It isn't a random kiss like the end of the Oracle games. It was built up throughout the game. You were controlling the both of them and watched them grow closer the farther into this mess they got. It symbolizes the end of Zelda's development. She grew into a hero worth respecting. It's refreshing after recent comments about her place in the Triforce and how she can't be a hero because Link is a hero, blah 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 blah. Spirit Tracks already proved that wrong, so there you go. While neither of these games deliver a theme or message as powerful as The Wind Waker, they carry on its legacy through well-written humor, excellent cutscene direction, a memorable cast, and an entirely new world to explore that gives it a sharper edge than some other games in the series intent on dredging up old foes or concepts. I appreciate that originality. If you'll recall, my criticisms with The Wind Waker can be broadly placed within two categories: the Great Sea and dungeon design. I would assume you'd have already watched that video, but in case you haven't, I think the Great Sea is too repetitive, funnels you into exploring at the very end of the game, and is far too restrictive in its linear progression for anything about it to feel exciting. Its dungeons are far too simple, relying heavily on logic puzzles and foregoing all sense of mystery by limiting your potential paths. In my opinion, Phantom Hourglass fixes at least one of these problems in its entirety. Sea exploration has seen a variety of tweaks that make it more exciting. It may lack in quantity, but it more than makes up for that in its quality. One of my chief issues with The Wind Waker's ocean was that it recycled a lot of uninteresting content, likely to make it seem larger than it actually was. Phantom Hourglass doesn't fall into the same pitfalls since the ocean itself is smaller in size. It has 16 islands in total, and all of them are closer together. Meanwhile, Wind Waker had 49 locations of note, spread out across the ocean. Phantom Hourglass is a bite-sized adventure by comparison, but that bite-sized adventure packs more of a punch. Absolutely none of it feels like filler, and you're allowed to explore all of it by the halfway point. You've got a few minigame islands, you've got fishing side quests, you've got a memorable short trading sequence, you've got an island you're forced to create a map for yourself, you've got salvage arm minigames, you've got distractions to keep you occupied as you travel an already smaller distance, islands not yet marked on your map that you stumble across on a whim, some of which contain permanent combat upgrades like increased attack power or defense, some of which contain tools used to fast travel. It's important to note that The Wind Waker also had this. Fast travel was obtained by fighting a mini-boss roaming the seas, the Mask of Truth gave you a permanent UI upgrade, etc. The chief difference is that Phantom Hourglass eliminates the reefs and other pointless islands in favor of adding more sea charts with a retooled reward system. In The Wind Waker, everything you could find had to be important in some way. Unless it was money, there had to be a rhyme or reason for you to explore, which usually meant a heart piece. That's fine, heart pieces are a good reward, but you don't get that immediate satisfaction. Since there are so many of them, a few of them were bound to be locked behind blatantly uninteresting and annoying objectives, like destroying a special pirate ship or finding the Golden Beetle shop. There just wasn't a lot to find besides rupees or more sea charts that led to more rupees, some of which you couldn't even hold without wallet upgrades. Your treasure, more often than not, was funneled into an endgame quest almost no one enjoys. Phantom Hourglass still often rewards you with rupees, but at least in this game it feels like they have a purpose. Fairies cannot be obtained in the overworld. Your only source of healing as an item is through potions you buy at shops. Additionally, there are orbs you can buy that contribute to sword and shield upgrades. I cannot tell you how satisfying it was to complete an optional dungeon puzzle or hard maze minigame, only for it to allow me to shoot sword beams and stuff. It's really cool. Finally, there are ship parts you can buy from Beetle. There are a lot of ship parts you can find throughout the game. So much, in fact, that an average playthrough won't even yield half of the available options. Besides making your ship look awesome, they also raise your ship's constitution depending on which set you roll with, which will change with each playthrough based on which parts you find. Not only will your playthrough be full of different treasures and ship parts than your friends, they'll be different every subsequent playthrough. Your ship is almost never going to look the same since there are so many different parts. This makes exploring the ocean even more fun because what you'll find at the bottom of the ocean floor or at the end of a side quest or as the prize of a minigame will always be different. They'll also always be useful, even if only a little bit. Different playthroughs will also change the value placed on different ship parts and treasures. There are several different treasures you can find that really only serve to be sold. However, some treasures will be worth more or less on different playthroughs. You'll quickly find out which treasures are worth the most, and when you find a treasure chest through a secret puzzle, there's a rush of anticipation. What are you gonna find? Will it be worth a lot? There's no wallet in Phantom Hourglass. You can hold 9,999 rupees at the start. Even if you reach that cap, you'll almost always be spending it on useful items or parts. It is a satisfying incentive to explore. No matter where you go in this game, it'll almost always be worth your time, and while that bolsters a first playthrough the most, the fact that the magic doesn't wear off on subsequent playthroughs is genius. I played this game twice, back to back for the purposes of this video, and had two entirely different experiences. It's very rare I can say that about a Zelda game, especially The Wind Waker, which still feels like the exact same adventure every single time I revisit it. Of course, there are still static rewards, but even those have been improved. Instead of a bajillion heart pieces, there are now 13 heart containers, meaning that any side quest or puzzle you solve with a heart container as your reward will see an instant bump in your maximum health. Quite frankly, I never knew how much I needed this until I got it. This makes collecting pieces of a heart container feel even more redundant in retrospect. This only works so well because there's a robust reward system that exists alongside the heart containers. It's the best of both worlds. The trading sequence is more interesting both because you aren't trading with the same 3 NPCs over and over, and because it rewards you with a helpful new attack. Fishing for the legendary Neptuna is challenging and fun in its own right, but you also get a heart container out of it. Nothing you do is useless. Once you're past the halfway point and pick up the final 2 sea charts, the sea is quite literally your oyster. Every island has an initial purpose, fast travel, upgrades, minigames. However, they all also have side purposes you fulfill with dungeon items. This ensures that you won't stumble onto an island with literally no purpose. There is always something for you to do. I really hated having to turn away from an island in The Wind Waker because I lacked the tool required to explore it. It was fun to go back once I got the tool I needed, but that initial frustration is one of the reasons it failed as a sea exploration game. Phantom Hourglass sidesteps this problem without ruining the appeal of gaining new dungeon items. Maybe you reach an island that you can't fully explore, but you'll always get something out of the trip. This is helped by the latter half of the game being non-linear. The final 3 objectives can be tackled in any order you desire. Where The Wind Waker's blindingly linear story progression clashed hard with its core conceit, Phantom Hourglass embraces that explorative spark in its second half. It's surprising that this game allows for so much freedom in a series that has traditionally had a very hard time balancing its linear and non-linear elements. Spirit Tracks changed a lot about its overworld by comparison. There is almost no freedom. You can choose where you want to go and discover new locations, but you can only do so on rails, literally. In Phantom Hourglass, you had complete control over where you wanted to go, and in what way you would get there. Spirit Tracks strips out the way and only leaves the where. Certainly the train is a novelty. You can control the speed at which it moves, you can blow the horn, switch train tracks, but it's really only a novelty. In fact, oddly enough, I found myself incredibly bored on long stretches of track where I almost never was in Phantom Hourglass. They both have fast travel, yet Spirit Tracks still had long stretches of nothing. Imagine trying to chart the Great Sea, but there were dividing lines everywhere deciding where you were going to go. It isn't just annoying, it's really boring. You still travel back to towns and caves once you get new items, but it's not as fun to actually do. Especially since the fast travel is no longer accessed in the menu. You have to enter designated gates, which simply means more uninterrupted travel. Some of the connected gates are confusingly placed and can only be accessed by completing a side quest that rewards you with a Force Gem. Phantom Hourglass's fast travel was simple. Bonk a gold frog with your cannon, write down the symbol on your map, and you can warp back to that location whenever you want. In Spirit Tracks, you'll first need 2 gates that are connected. You'll often pass by inactive gates and make note of them on your map. Once you find a gate with a gem on top of it, you shoot it with your cannon, activating the link between them, blow your whistle, and fast travel. Some of these gates take a very long time to activate, seeing as they're usually hidden behind side quests you can't complete until much later. Some side quests give you shortcuts by way of creating railways that connect them in different areas, but this still means a whole lot of nothing while you sit on the train and occasionally tap the screen or catch bunnies. Phantom Hourglass places no such restrictions on travel. As soon as you get the Northeastern Sea Chart from the Temple of the Ocean King, you can travel north, solve the Whale Island puzzle, talk to the Gold Frog, and now you have access to fast travel. All you need to do is find the Gold Frogs, which are usually near places of interest anyway. There are typically 2 of them for each quadrant that are situated around areas of interest to cut down on travel time. When travel time was higher than average, it was typically only because there was a fish to catch or treasure to find. Spirit Tracks' only comparable overworld objective are the 10 bunnies located in each rail map. It's a fun side quest, but the minigame itself is much shorter than the fishing or the salvage arm, so you're typically right back to a whole lot of nothing after catching a bunny, which would be fine if there were other fun objectives to distract you. The vast majority of overworld objectives involve taking someone or something from one place to another. The amount of times you're asked to do this boggles the mind. What you're usually tasked with is, for example, taking an Anuki from Anuki village to a place that's warmer. In this case, to the Gorons. You have to take him there while abiding by railway laws. Blow your horn when there's a horn sign, slow down to normal speed when the sign says so, go back to high speed when the sign tells you, don't get hit by enemies, don't come to an immediate full stop, and stop before the line at your destination. The first couple times you do a quest like this, it's pretty fun. You're forced to pay attention and actually follow the game's rules so you don't upset the passenger. There are similar quests that see you transporting fish or ice from one town to another, usually with the caveat being that it will melt or spoil over time and you'll lose cargo if hit by an enemy. Again, fun the first few times, but when you realize that you are forced to, in effect, travel from one place to another a whopping 22 times, and that it makes up almost all of your overworld exploration, it gets maybe a little old. These quests are used as a way to open up a secret, startlingly similar to the Kinstone system. You aren't allowed to travel to these locations whenever you want because you're supposed to be humming along the path the game directs you down. New railways usually lead to a dungeon with treasure, a fast travel gate, or more bunnies. I can't tell you how disappointing it is to travel to a new railway only for it to be a dumping ground for bunnies and nothing else. That's why I hate this stuff, not necessarily because I'm a completionist, but because I would appreciate if what I decided to do outside of the main quest felt worth my time. I've often gotten comments telling me that expecting Zelda games to be completionist friendly is a flawed mindset. I agree, that isn't what I'm trying to say here. Often I won't complete Zelda games that aren't satisfying to complete. Whenever I decide to go back to Ocarina of Time, I probably won't be collecting the Skulltula again, or doing the Mask side quest, or using the Song of Storms to blow holes into the ground. I care far more about the dungeons, the story, the music, everything else. The reason I talk about all the side content in these videos is because that's what you're here for, right? I evaluate all of a game's content. Isn't it fair of me to point out that doing side content might not be fun? Imagine a world where there wasn't pointless filler in games like Spirit Tracks, Wind Waker, or Minish Cap. They'd be better for it, right? I would want to engage with the game fully rather than only in pieces. There are many Zelda games I love fully completing, or at least completing most of. You won't see me doing so with something like Spirit Tracks or Minish Cap ever again. It's hard not to imagine a world where Spirit Tracks had more free-form exploration. The pieces are already in place. When the Spirit Tracks vanish at the beginning of the game and you get your hands on the magical Spirit Train, is it so far-fetched to imagine your Spirit Train creating its own tracks? This would certainly eliminate rail switching, but I feel like that's a worthy sacrifice in the face of increased freedom and less travel time. If that's too radical a change, maybe upping the travel speed or adding an additional notch that increased your travel speed would have been a good compromise. In the Dark Realm, your train is suddenly much faster than it used to be, and as soon as I saw that, I wondered why it couldn't have been that fast for the rest of the game. There really is no explanation that would satisfy me. Just make it an optional speed notch so players could adjust it if need be. Make it an unlock later on or something if you don't want players to be too overpowered. I don't care how you fix this, I just don't want to be on the train for hours of my life doing nothing. Now, I'll admit, what it lacks in freedom it makes up for in substance. While I loved sailing in Phantom Hourglass, certain aspects of it could get repetitive. There weren't many enemies. Sharks, pirate ships, floating eyeballs, squiddies, vine traps, and whatever this is. Bosses would appear from time to time, but they were never more complicated than shoot it repeatedly in the eye sockets. Spirit Tracks has 4 different biomes with interesting new enemies and objectives in each quadrant. There are demon train cars halting progression that can one-hit kill you. forcing you to think out your path carefully. A boss that forces you to be precise with your aiming, and even lead your shots since the target is always moving. Wild boars with moblin riders, evil snowmen that chuck their heads at you, pirate ships even still, evil squids that change location rapidly, sand sharks that only become vulnerable during specific windows. Sometimes you travel underwater or to a snow biome through a winter storm, or through the lost woods on a specific path, or lugging ice through the mountains, or finding out the most optimal path to your objectives so the dark ore doesn't melt in the sunlight. Maybe it gets old after a while, but it's variety that the Great Sea lacked. There was a section of Phantom Hourglass where you have to chase the ghost ship through thick fog, and you take notes from the Wayfarer to take the correct path. This was really cool and a neat use of the map-making mechanic, but it never really popped up again. Spirit Tracks has you taking down specific directions very frequently. I remember in the Sand Rail map, you had to recognize that the Sand Sanctuary map was the same as your rail map, and find out where the gazes of the overworld statues all connected, and transfer that information to the Sanctuary map. It's really cool stuff. You don't do that in other Zelda games. When the path forward isn't obfuscated, you'll be boarded by pirates or something. It feels like there's always something fun happening. By the time you reach the final boss, where you have to keep up with the demon train, switching rails to avoid colliding with it, shooting the various targets, maintaining your speed, it feels earned. There's even a Pac-Man-like section where you pick up tears of light and destroy the smaller demon trains, which is a puzzle in and of itself. The only equivalent section in Phantom Hourglass occurs when you chase the ghost ship, and even then, Linebeck sails it for you, so all you're really doing is tapping a bunch of objects. It thankfully retains the train customization system, instead opting to use treasure as both a source of money and a component to craft train parts. This is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it does make your exploration feel meaningful, as the game's relative lack of freedom means that overworld exploration is more challenging. I never died in Phantom Hourglass, where I died a few times or came close to it in Spirit Tracks. When you're on rails, it's a lot easier for them to craft harder challenges, so not only are the train car upgrades useful for increased health, it gives new purpose to the treasures you'll be collecting. It also means that you can more easily get the ship parts you want, since you can craft almost any of them you like. Nothing was more frustrating in Phantom Hourglass than getting the exact same ship part 3 times, especially if it only sold for 50 rupees. However, it also means that the treasure system had to be changed. The treasures you find are still semi-random, but they're placed into categories. Some challenges or chests will contain uncommon items, some common, some rare. They will all have values according to their categories, so even if they're random treasures, they will always net you around the same price based on the difficulty of the task you completed. This defeats the point of having a treasure system in the first place, honestly. It would likely be more lucrative to give you rupees instead, since that initial wonder upon opening a chest will only ever be there on a first playthrough. You could argue that it was necessary because Spirit Tracks had tougher challenges, so getting a bad reward would have felt cheap. I do agree with that sentiment, but Phantom Hourglass didn't seem to struggle with this because you would only figure out the treasure values late into the game. Until then, you're usually left wondering, which eliminates the potential frustration. Spirit Tracks is more predictable by comparison, which is probably fine for some people, but I don't like it as much. The way I see it, they addressed a problem that I don't think ever existed. While Spirit Tracks is a more visually appealing and mechanically challenging overworld, it often comes at the price of a railroaded progression. Whereas Phantom Hourglass often gives you that freedom at the cost of the interactivity with the sea being fairly minimal. Compared to catching bunnies or honking your horn at golden dolphins, doing the salvage arm minigame for the umpteenth time, while challenging, can get repetitive. Especially since the Great Sea, as open as it is visually exhausting after already seeing similar sights in The Wind Waker. Spirit Tracks is a breath of fresh air in that regard, with a music track that feels more its own. Phantom Hourglass didn't have a bad overworld theme. Any game borrowing music notes from The Wind Waker is clearly off to a good start, but it's clearly reminiscent of The Wind Waker, giving it less of its own identity. Through just the overworld alone, I hope you're starting to understand my dilemma. It's very hard to talk about these games separately because they're structured almost exactly the same way, they just change each other's particulars. Which brings me to something they both share. The Nintendo DS is a unique system. It has 2 screens, a touchscreen, a microphone, and damn it if these two games weren't gonna take full advantage of it. Link is controlled using the stylus. Spirit Tracks Link is a little more comfortable to control at the cost of his jump attack feeling incredibly awkward and precise, while Phantom Hourglass Link is less comfortable, but his jump attack is more forgiving. I swear I'm not making this up, there's a really weird give and take between these two games. Every single action is done through the touchscreen. Shoulder buttons are used to activate items, and the D-pad is used as a menu shortcut. No doubt this is at least a little controversial, but I enjoy how much use these games get out of the stylus. Movement is whatever. You move how you move, you know? Nothing feels different than if you were just using a D-pad. But combat is very different. You slash using horizontal swipes, and lunge by tapping at the enemy. A spin attack is executed with a spin of the stylus, and paired with dungeon items all being controlled using the stylus, combat takes on a different rhythm than past entries. Where before you would face a direction and press the attack button, you have a freer degree of control here. This is technically the first 2D Zelda with analog movement, just without the actual analog stick itself. As much as I love past 2D entries, I am so happy to be playing 2D Zelda with free movement. Additionally, the touchscreen items make combat a joy. Where previous games would see you simply throwing a boomerang in front of you or using lock-on, these games let you draw a path for the boomerang. In combat, this means you often need to anticipate enemy movement to account for the throw delay, and while it doesn't revolutionize combat, it does lend each encounter a memorable solution. You might have to take out your whirlwind to send a projectile back at an enemy, which requires taking aim with the stylus and firing by blowing into the mic. As gimmicky as that sounds, it feels refreshingly original in its own way and mechanically challenging. You gotta blow into the mic to make it work. It's hard to deny how fun it can make 2D Zelda combat, though it is often easier than previous titles since you do have a lot more control over your character. They do both have moments of Metroid Prime 3-itis, as I like to call it. Moments like having you shout into the microphone to get a character's attention, or speaking answers into the microphone, or blowing torches out with your microphone. They're undeniably gimmicky, but they're also harmless. And not all of them are as useless. There are cool DS-related puzzles and uses in both of these games. One of my favorite puzzles involves putting your DS into sleep mode to copy a map on the top screen onto the bottom screen. Essentially, you're pressing them together by closing the top screen onto the bottom one. The game only hints at this, which makes it all the more satisfying to figure out. While it does not translate well to Virtual Console, I think that fact alone shows that it couldn't have existed anywhere else. Similarly, the Spirit Flute is one of my favorite Zelda instruments for the novelty alone. I'm probably the only person who likes this thing. I don't know, while it can be a little finicky, I like the idea that I'm actually blowing into a flute to make music, rather than inputting buttons. It's a cool successor to instruments like the Wind Waker or the Ocarina of Time. By far the biggest inclusion, though, is map making. Using the stylus, you can draw on any map you own. Dungeon maps, area maps, sea chart maps, and railway maps. You can take notes, draw symbols, you can do practically anything, and I love it. This might just be my favorite thing about these two games, and it's one of the only things I feel both titles do right, mostly because they handle it in exactly the same way, be it surface level uses, jotting down directions on a map, or more advanced uses, connecting various objects via lines and digging at their intersection, almost as if you're creating your own treasure map. Though they often don't go as far as I would have liked, I appreciate the attempt. I also need to sometimes remember that these games were made for children, so a lot of what I suggest in these videos probably isn't entirely fair. Nonetheless, I'm glad we got puzzles like figure out which of these 6 Anuki are lying, or find out which one of these 2 heads are friends based on a stone tablet riddle. Even when remade on the Wii U, the Wind Waker had none of this, which is a shame. Obviously, I wasn't expecting them to rehaul the puzzle design, but at least letting me draw on the map with the gamepad would have been nice. In Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, I can write notes wherever I happen to be. Notes telling me to revisit a town later on, notes about traps, or notes about bunnies I might have missed. It's especially fun in Phantom Hourglass since it complements the exploration a lot more. You also tend to take in your surroundings more closely when you're taking notes. It feels a lot more natural to talk to every single NPC than it is in other Zelda games. You're sometimes forced to for additional directions. It's like you actually don't know the way forward. You need to figure it out yourself. Phantom Hourglass actually has an island that you chart yourself. You walk along the edges, drawing lines until you've charted out a whale. It only occurs once, which is a shame, But this is completely unlike other Zelda games. It's innovative. It asks you to think about the world and solve puzzles in a new way. Inside the cave on Whale Island, there's a riddle that tells you to dig under the statue located at the eye. That's all it tells you. You have to figure out that the whale on the sea chart has an eye. You go to the eye, you dig there, you get treasure. I know a lot of it seems way too simple, but the fact that you're going off riddles, that you're creating your own sea charts, that you're doing all this yourself, it's a feeling that I haven't gotten in other games, which is why I'm slightly more forgiving of the dungeon design. I'm gonna save the Temple of the Ocean King and the Tower of Spirits for the very end of this section. They are, we'll just say, oddities, even in their own series. For now, let's focus on the dungeons and other areas you visit only once. How should I say? In terms of complexity, they kinda suck. Not even just by my own standards. I would go as far as to say they feel more like a straight line than the dungeons in The Wind Waker. In terms of progression, the Wind Temple is very straightforward. You solve puzzles, like throwing a bomb at some switches, moving a block to avoid the wind, using the wind to travel a longer distance. Yeah, it's none of it is very complicated. Sometimes you complete combat challenges. That's pretty self-explanatory. Occasionally, you open up ways to backtrack more easily, even though you never need to do so. It's not an exaggeration to say every dungeon is like this. Some puzzles might be larger and more complicated, but they're always confined to one room, and the way forward is always obvious, with no exceptions. I think I'm more okay with these dungeons because they don't try to be more complicated than they actually are, and lean into other aspects of their design. It's sort of like how I still enjoy a lot of the dungeons in Twilight Princess, despite them mostly being straightforward. Each dungeon in both of these games will present you with an enemy that is more cumbersome to defeat at first. In Spirit Tracks, you'll come across elemental enemies that can only be taken out when you use the Whirlwind, an item that surely isn't as easy to use as your sword. However, when you get the Boomerang, you're suddenly able to deal with these enemies a lot easier. Once you're at the end of both games, it feels like every enemy has an intended item solution. In Spirit Tracks, you use the Boomerang to stun Wolfos, or the bow to knock the heads off a skeleton. I'm mentioning Spirit Tracks more and more because I feel like it does a better job leaning into its unique design aspects than Phantom Hourglass when controlling Link. Phantom Hourglass had its moments. There are several portions of Muto's Temple where you have to activate objects out of view of your camera. In the beginning, there's a switch you have to activate from far away so you have enough time to enter the doorway ahead of you. Later on, you open a doorway so that on the other side of it, you can shoot an arrow at the switch that changes the water level. Unfortunately, most other dungeons never even get that far. Pair that with the dungeons looking incredibly generic and samey, and you get a fairly boring main quest progression. Spirit Tracks, while not doing anything exceptional with its dungeon design in particular, generally has better ideas in its linear progression. Ideas such as sending keymasters after you while you carry the big key. Phantom Hourglass also had this mechanic where you have to carry the big key to the boss door, but I'm seriously not exaggerating when I say it did nothing with this idea. The closest it brushed was maybe Muto's Temple, where you take it with you on a moving platform and fend off skeletons. You can put it down while this happens, and the hammer allows you to literally tap the skeletons and instantly kill them, so it's really no different than if it wasn't there. In Spirit Tracks, when you pick up the key, keymasters are immediately on your ass trying to take it away from you. In the Fire Temple, you have to guide the big key through a minecart switch challenge to ensure it isn't lost along the way. This is technically in the Tower of Spirits, so maybe I'm breaking my own code here, but there's a section where you have to alternate between Link and Phantom Zelda, and Link has to use his bow to defeat the keymasters from across the room where only Phantom Zelda can enter. It isn't taken nearly as far as I would have liked, but at least it's taken somewhere as opposed to nowhere. Additionally, items have more original use cases. The Boomerang can now take on ice as an element, and you have to use it to create temporary platforms on the water, while also contending with enemies. This is surprisingly tricky to do, and is used frequently both inside and outside of dungeons. Or the Sand Rod, which has you digging up items under the sand, creating platforms for yourself, stopping spike cylinders at just the right time to create platforms, creating height for yourself to jump on Zelda, transporting Zelda across sand she would otherwise sink into, and solving these weird falling cube puzzles, you know the ones I'm talking about. Or the whip, which is not only a cool redesign for the grapple hook, it has an element of timing associated with it, which is expanded upon really well in an optional minigame. Compare that to the hammer, which is only really used to flip enemies over, activate switches, and fling yourself into the air. The boomerang can only really transport fire from one torch to another, or activate a switch from far away. Same with the grappling hook. Overall, Spirit Tracks does a good job expanding upon the often lackluster ideas in Phantom Hourglass, and does so more frequently to boot. Though much of it is optional, it has more instances of taking notes or completing challenges. Phantom Hourglass had practically no secret caves or dungeons, mostly just minigames and treasure, which worked fine enough. A lot of that stuff was fun. One of my favorites was this timed maze. There were switches everywhere that did a whole host of things, and you kinda had to chart out your optimal path through the various runs so that you could optimize your run, hit the switches in the correct order, and get to the treasure chest in time. It's kinda like a microcosm of the Temple of the Ocean King, which we'll get to later. There are other fun side quests. The guy out in the sea who has his own King of Red Lions and is posing as you. You go there to spar with him sometimes, and it's humorous enough. You got the weird telescope people with the plot twist that they're all looking into kaleidoscopes and not telescopes. There's an island shaped like a DS. You dig where the menu icons are, that's kinda neat. Also, there's a Goron minigame here at the end of the game. You control the Goron and hit the crystals in the amount of time allotted. It's not really that complicated. I mean, it's fun, I guess. You know, what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of fun side objectives in Phantom Hourglass, but they're only really fun because the writing is strong. It's not necessarily because they're fun objectives in and of themselves. Some minigames are fun, but the fact that there are no optional caves or dungeons really says a lot. You know, I'd be lying if I said the game wasn't lacking in side content. There just isn't as much to do as there is in Spirit Tracks. And though I'd argue that Spirit Tracks had far too much, most of the locations you uncover are well worth the trip and beef up the side content in a positive way. Especially the various optional stations, which either test you on a mechanical skill, like running across ice as fast as you can, or test you on your ability to solve riddles, like the disorientation station. Spirit Tracks just has more optional treasure chests, rupees, items, and fun challenges than average. You could often dig with the shovel to find optional sea charts and rupees in Phantom Hourglass, which was fun in its own right and often accompanied by a riddle to solve. But Spirit Tracks lets you blow away leaves, hit a hidden switch almost out of view, blow a cucko off a building by positioning it just right, and using it to fly to other buildings, doing an entire Temple of the Ocean King inspired dungeon without a sword. This can go on for quite a while, and the rewards can sometimes be more interesting than they were in Phantom Hourglass. Finding the stamp stations, for instance, will reward you with permanent cosmetic changes like Engineer's Clothing or the Wind Waker Shield, and many of those stations are difficult to find, especially the ones located in dungeons. Many of the minigames from Phantom Hourglass return in an improved format, where previously you'd shoot cannons at targets for a while or shoot arrows at wooden targets. Spirit Tracks sees you in a mountain range with moving targets that have punishments for shooting too early, on a train that varies wildly in speeds, or a shooting range that is also a prison breakout with a boss at the end. From being ambushed and having to protect the Locomos against a unique mini-boss, to inquiring about the correct path through the Lost Woods, to transporting ice through a route infested with enemy train cars. Again, it feels like, on the main quest at least, you're always doing something fun or interesting. I know I haven't talked about the dungeon design itself, but it would really just be me repeating myself, which is also another reason why both of these games are in one video. If you really want a video of me saying the Fire Temple is too simple, the Ice Temple is too simple, the Forest Temple is too simple, I guess you're just out of luck. Just take my word for it. I guess Spirit Tracks has stronger overall dungeon design, especially in its final 3 dungeons. They have interesting moments. The mini-boss of the Ocean Temple is tricky at first because you're supposed to let him pull you in so you can counterattack, rather than trying to run away. Same with the room where you have to hit a switch so some boulders will fall in another square. Initially, you'd think this is supposed to let you cross the boulders, but you can't open them in a way that lets you sneak past. You have to realize that this changes where the boulders fall in the floor below you, which is sneaky, and I like that. The Sand Temple has a fun riddle to solve, subtly teaching you that the sand rod can be used to dig up items. You're tested later in the dungeon to find the big key. It also has a slightly more complicated progression by allowing you to go to so many different places at once after getting the sand rod. Though admittedly it closes up pretty fast and is nowhere near as complicated as some of the better dungeons in the series. The bosses are often the highlights, either using the DS in a cool way or by just being fun bosses. There are too many to count. I like how the Colossus in Muto's temple plays with perspective. I like the bosses in both fire temples, one forcing you to make tricky shots with a bow on a moving minecart, and the other a battle to multitask between a Goron and Link. The boss of the Temple of Courage has you looking to the top screen through the eyes of an invisible boss, so you can aim at the screen to hit it. None of them are terribly complex or difficult, but I appreciate how unique they are. Some of them, like the boss of the Snow Temple, make really creative use of the boomerang's elemental effects and can be genuinely challenging in the heat of the moment. That's just it though. These dungeons all have satisfying and creative moments. They don't necessarily come together in a compelling way. The dungeons in Spirit Tracks come close, but they don't quite reach the end goal. There are a lot of moments that feel way too simple. Whenever you're asked to hit switches in a certain order, they all but spell it out to you. You'll be asked to draw a path for a moving platform, but all you really have to do is remember the order to hit the switches, because an earlier stone tablet literally told you to remember the order for the entire dungeon. You're never gonna forget that, so it leads to a lot of the puzzles being solved for you. Spirit Tracks, at least, doesn't rely on the hand-holdy gossip stones that spell out the answer for you, at least not as frequently. That's a large part of what made the dungeons in Phantom Hourglass so boring. There were more moments in Spirit Tracks where I had to think for myself, but not many more. They're largely disappointing, aside from the two standout examples. The Temple of Spirits and the Temple of the Ocean King are the two best dungeons across both games, but for entirely different, often opposite reasons. On paper, it sounds like a terrible idea to revisit the Temple of the Ocean King over and over, but in practice, it becomes one of the most unique dungeons in Zelda history. Whenever you return, you have items that open up new shortcuts, so while you are running through the same level design, you can run through the dungeon a different way each time. It incentivizes you to learn the layout, jot down helpful notes, so that when you return later on, you can speed through it like a pro. It's genuinely difficult to avoid the phantoms, as they're usually the biggest obstacle to a speedy run. You're encouraged to learn their patrol paths and find clever ways to bypass them so you don't run out of time. One of your revisits allows you to grab 2 new sea charts all in one visit, but only if you're good enough. I found myself very deep into the temple, having completely run out of sand, and attempting to finish it while losing health along the way was one of the most harrowing experiences a Zelda game has ever offered me. Exploring the Temple of the Ocean King feels dangerous, it feels tense, but when you come back at the end of the game, storm the temple, and show Bellum who's boss, it's insanely satisfying because you developed that path throughout the game. You conquered this huge challenge over time, and I love that so much as a concept. Some of the final rooms have you doing some tricky maneuvering to stay away from the phantoms and transport heavy items, all while you have to manage your walking speed to not alert nearby phantoms. They also have hidden items you can try for, but only if you're truly confident you know what you're doing, since going for optional items eats up a lot of time. Unfortunately, that focus on moment-to-moment puzzle design holds it back from being truly brilliant. Imagine one of the more complicated Zelda dungeons in the series. The Water Temple, maybe. There are a lot of people who would absolutely loathe this, but a complicated dungeon under the gun of a timer with enemies that could shave off that time, I would love something like that. It reminds me of tackling a dungeon near the end of the 3rd day in Majora's Mask. I really haven't gotten a similar feeling until I played Phantom Hourglass, but I also think as dungeons, Majora's Mask had much more complicated design that complemented that timer even more. The Temple of the Ocean King only really asks you to hit a switch and run to your objective, or to stay away from the phantoms that you can eventually stun. It's fun to see how fast you can eventually clear it, but that initial run through is always going to be less complicated than it could be. The Tower of Spirits fixes that aspect of it. There are some devious puzzles in this game that had me stumped for quite a while. Adding Phantom Zelda offers a whole new dimension of puzzle solving. You can jump on her shield for additional height, or you can use her as a shield to fight larger enemies or protect you from fire, or you can use her to distract the other phantoms so you can slip by, but she also can't cross sand or use Link's items, so you have to find clever ways of getting her where she needs to go. There's one room where Zelda is able to warp to the Seeker Eyes, but the obvious warp points don't really allow her to do anything on her own. You need to instead get her to teleporters so she can warp with Link at various points. They both need to do their own parts of the dungeon, working together to bypass obstacles that neither of them could accomplish alone. In other words, it's an evolved escort quest. You're not escorting Zelda, you're helping her, just as Zelda's helping you. Not only is this complex, it also strengthens the bond between Link and Zelda, showing that the both of them are accomplishing great things, not just Link. Just compare the final floors of the Tower of Spirits to the final floors of the Temple of the Ocean King. At most, the latter asks you to hit a switch with your boomerang and book it across the level. Phantoms do chase you, that much is true, but they'll never catch up to you and can't chase you into the second floor. It's made especially easy considering you can permanently take out the Seeker Eyes that alert phantoms to your location. The final floor sees you picking up triangle pieces, stunning the phantoms as soon as they spawn in. Seriously, there is almost nothing challenging about this. Spirit Tracks places the challenge within the progression itself. There are various different types of Phantom Zelda can control. Some will light torches in dark areas, some can roll around and destroy obstacles at the cost of not being able to pick up Link or other items, some can instantly teleport to the Seeker Eyes. None of them can do everything though, and you need to switch phantoms, going from one level to another to first find 3 small keys by solving multi-level challenges, and then activating 3 switches in multiple rooms on the same floor. You've got to do things like create sand platforms to hop on top of Zelda, or intentionally get caught by a Seeker Eye so you can move it to a place that would be ideal for Zelda to warp to, or have Zelda hold an arrow shooter so it's at the right height for Link to shoot it. I was in the last stretch of the Tower of Spirits for 1 hour and 25 minutes on my first playthrough. It genuinely confused me, and I was in love. Zelda, as a mechanic, is used appropriately up to the final moments of the game, where you're using her as a shield to advance on Malladus, while you use Link to keep the electric rats from breaking her composure. Later, you use her to get behind Malladus by controlling her path and distracting him with Link. You're controlling 2 characters at once. It is an intense mechanical challenge to multitask this much, and it's a skill I rarely see tested as wonderfully as this. It's a mechanic that is taught through a seemingly throwaway stealth section at the beginning and used throughout to great effect. Phantom Hourglass doesn't get the same mileage out of its endgame. Sure, you draw the hourglass symbol and it uses the 2 screens of the DS to link Ciella's sight with the top screen, but it doesn't really expand upon many of Phantom Hourglass's mechanics in the same way Spirit Tracks does. Probably because Phantom Hourglass's core mechanics are not as diverse. It's similar in the sense that the main dungeon of Spirit Tracks has far more meat on its bones. Yet, even though it feels more fulfilling to complete than the Temple of the Ocean King, it completely ditched what made that temple great in the first place. There's no longer any timer, making the phantoms feel almost useless as a mechanic. And you don't have to redo any of its content, which defeats the purpose of traveling back at various points. Like the games themselves, their weaknesses are fixed as much as their strengths are completely ruined. Why travel back to the Temple of Spirits at all if you aren't going to redo content you've already done? There's almost no point. You could just take these ideas and put them in the regular dungeons. It would change absolutely nothing. There isn't as much significance to scaling the Temple of Spirits, because you don't come back to it with the same confidence. If anything, the pacing issues that people claim exist in Phantom Hourglass fit Spirit Tracks far more. I've heard complaints that having to run back to the Temple of the Ocean King over and over is annoying, but I felt far more annoyed that I had to keep going back to the Temple of Spirits because all you were doing was completing disconnected challenges. Even I can admit that the Tower of Spirits is a little too long, and some of its puzzles don't lend themselves to being done really fast, so perhaps some of the slower stuff you end up doing could have been toned down or removed. I'm not suggesting that the Tower of Spirits as it now exists be exactly like the Temple of the Ocean King, but as it currently exists, it's missing what made the former so special in the first place, even if in terms of design it hits all the right buttons for me. If only Phantom Hourglass had better dungeon design, and if only Spirit Tracks had better overarching design. This is what led me to the video's thesis. What Phantom Hourglass lacks, Spirit Tracks has, and what Spirit Tracks lacks, Phantom Hourglass has. They are both held back from being truly great Zelda games by each other. I can imagine a truly amazing successor to The Wind Waker, but I'm not sure either of these games really provide that in isolation. Which is a saddening realization when you consider that another game like these two will probably never happen. The DS is long dead, the 3DS winding down, and the Switch simply can't carry over these same ideas and make them work. There's just no way. Unless we get a successor to the DS line that, for some reason, takes the best ideas from these old Zelda games, I don't think we'll ever see these ideas again. For all they failed to do, I also feel they were some of the most innovative Zelda games of their time. They tried some interesting things, and though they didn't always work, I'm impressed by just how far they were willing to take some of these ideas. Phantom Hourglass is a joy to explore and get lost in, but the main quest drags it down, and the lack of meaningful content makes the adventure feel shorter and less impactful than it really should be. Spirit Tracks is a fun main quest with a lot of interesting dungeon ideas and fun optional areas, but it has one of the worst overworlds I have ever seen in a Zelda game, filled with so many repetitive fetch quests that listening to one of the best overworld themes in Zelda history eventually drove me insane. I'm hoping, at least, that a future game will carry on these forgotten ideas. A dungeon you visit multiple times, perhaps, or a set of items with unusual uses, or maybe even a limited map-making mechanic, however hamstrung it might be on a system that can't take advantage of 2 screens. Whatever the case, we will likely never see a Zelda game this specific a fusion ever again. Playing these games back to back is worse than playing them individually, and that's just depressing. Just indulge me for a moment. There was a steampunk Zelda concept going around a while back, and I can't help but feel like this would be one of my favorite games ever made if it took the best of these 2 games. They just let loose and let you explore the land, sea, and sky. I know it sounds like a pipe dream, but just imagine it. You'd still have map making, it would continue to expand the world and introduce new enemies, characters, and concepts. Not only is it the kind of originality I've craved for a very long time in a series so committed to Hyrule, it would blend 2 of the most creative Zelda games ever into an unforgettable experience. Look, I love Breath of the Wild, but even I can admit that it didn't really scratch that same itch. It took Zelda into new territory, but in terms of identity, I don't feel like it made as much of a statement as it could have. By sticking so steadfast to series staples, while also abandoning so many others, it feels almost half committed to its own ideals, where these 2 random DS games were closer to realizing it years before Breath of the Wild was even a concept. I mean, I have no way of knowing if that imaginary game would be good. All I have is this video as my claim. All the evidence is here. Somewhere between these 2 games rests the best Zelda ever made. One that we'll never get, and I know we'll never get it.